In this video, we are gonna see how we can render in different ways using VRAY for SketchUp. So first of all, right now I'm visualizing a style inside SketchUp, which is kind of hand drawing style. And these are pretty cool effects that you can get directly from SketchUp. So if you're interested, you can check the videos about SketchUp, and you can also write your questions in the comments and also suggestions. So right now we will not need this particular style. So I will change this one here and set it to the default simple style in SketchUp that we already find. And also want to get rid of this floor. So I will delete everything in order to have a simple scene here that I can use. And if you don't have any SketchUp scenes at all, you can always use the 3D warehouse and download something from there. And we already talked about, again, this tool here in another video. So let's get started here with the various rendering tools and also other objects that we're gonna see. Now let's jump directly into the frame buffer as we did in the previous video. So we're gonna make a first test render to see if everything works and the light is good and so on. So I'm gonna go here. I can make this a little bit smaller and click on the teapot at the top right there. And there's my first render. Now the first thing I noticed is that this house is kind of floating into the space because it doesn't recognize the, let's say, the floor of SketchUp. So what I can do here, one of the first things I usually do is add a infinite plane. This is a VRAY object and it's infinite plane that I can place anywhere. And in this case, I want to place it somewhere, maybe here in the middle of this slab, and I'm going to make another render. Now this is the way this render engine used to work a long time ago. So you always need to refresh or relaunch the render to see the changes happening into the rendered view. So you click here and now we should see some shadows appear in the back of the, there you go. And also you can see the difference in the material in the infinite plane, which is like a plain white, and it probably is too bright, it's too white. But we're going to fix this later on. Let's focus on the different ways to render. So this first one, we can call this like classic or default or standard render. This one here instead, it's called the interactive render. And if you press this button here, you're gonna start to render, and it will continue for just a little bit until it finds some changes happening into the view, which could be simply a different position of the camera, like I'm doing right now. I'm just navigating into the SketchUp scene, so the interactive render restarts over and over again. Now you can stop this process by pressing on the abort rendering. You can also abort any other type of rendering. So if you do the classic one, and you decide that you don't want to wait till the end, you can click here and stop it in any moment. So these are the first two that we find here. And also we saw another one that we can activate from the toolbar, which is the viewport render. So let's close this one and let's launch the viewport render. And in this case, we're gonna render again in a progressive manner and also interactive, what we see in the SketchUp viewport. So this is basically a bigger version of what you get here by pressing the interactive rendering. And you can also see that if you open up the frame buffer, you have like this in a duplicated way. So you have the exact copy of the view that you are seeing here in the SketchUp viewport, but this is a bigger version right here. And well, it's not more defined than this one. It's just a little bit bigger, as you can see. So you can see better, but a little bit more blurred. Now let's launch the render again. So if well, let's use this one here because it's bigger and we can see it better. So if I click here again, okay, now you can see this noise that starts to disappear, and at some point when the render is finished, it's gonna look much more better than the starting image, because it gets rid of all the noise inside the render. Now you can define the quality of a render by also the quantity of the noise that you have inside the rendered image. So in this case, you can see that the shadowy part, the ones that are not directly illuminated or they are a little bit in the shadow, they look more noisy than the other. And these are all settings, advanced settings, that we're gonna see in other videos. This is just to introduce to you these issues that we have when we do renderings. So let's say that your main concern is to get rid of that noise as better as you can. But right now it's not really a concern, because we are just working on the model. We'll need to create materials and lights and so on, and only in the final part you want to get the best from the rendering settings. So right now we just need to be quick. We need the speed, we don't need the quality. So the next tool here is the region render. Now this is similar to the previously seen render, but in this case we can just render a region. So for example, I want to focus on this door. I want to test different materials or different doors. So I don't need to re-render everything all over again. I just need to focus on that part. So I create a region, and then I press the normal rendering, the classic rendering, or the progressive rendering, doesn't matter, they all work in the same way. So if I eliminate or clear the image, I can see this. So if I click on this one, it's gonna work. And if I stop this and use the static render, let's call it static, not interactive, it's gonna work the same. So the region, it's something that you can use for any type of rendering. Now again, if you use the interactive, you don't need to relaunch every time the render. So this is the advantage in using the interactive. So if you scale the region, of if you make other region also, you can create more regions. You can see you don't need to relaunch all over again. So this is why interactive is pretty useful, but also be careful, because interactive, it's a heavier process than the static render, because it's gonna render every time you're gonna change something. So it's gonna re-render, 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 and you can get then really strange effects if you use a lot of regions here. Gonna look like a, I don't know, like a deconstructive painting like Picasso. So be careful about that. And also you have here the render region as well. So if you open up the viewport render, you can use the viewport render region right here as well. So you can define which region you want to render. Now, if you want to clear everything up, remember that you have this button right here to clear everything. And let's also deactivate the region render right now. So we're gonna re-render everything again. Before we press render, I want to show you this one here, which is the follow mouse. And this is gonna set a starting point for the buckets. And what are the buckets basically? And do we use the buckets? So basically, in the standard render settings, you don't have buckets activated. So when you do a render, either in the standard or in the interactive, this way to render, which is reducing the noise step by step in each pass, this is called progressive rendering. So it's gonna progressively increase the quality and decrease the noise. This is how, well, in a really synthetical way, is the progressive it's working. But if I want to change that, I want to use the bucket mode, which is I think older than the progressive. I can go here in the VRAY asset editor and click on the settings, which I am already in right now. So these are the settings. And if I go to render, these are some basic settings that you can set, for example, the quality as well. But let's focus on the part that we are talking about right now, which is the progressive. So this one here enables the progressive image sampling mode. If you disable this, it's gonna activate the bucket rendering mode. So if I deactivate the progressive and clear the image and relaunch again the rendering, I will see these buckets, which are these little colored squares that are gonna appear around the image. Now these are your processor, your CPU working, and each of that square should be one processor, one CPU unit. So the more CPU units you have, the more processor you have, the faster you're gonna go, because each one is gonna get a piece of the scene, a piece of the image. And with this one, you can define where to start when using the bucket render. So if you click here and say, okay, I want to start from this door because I'm interested firstly in this door and then in the rest. Then I want to start from here and perhaps abort the rendering if I see that something is not working. This is why I can use bucket mode and this little tool here, follow mouse. So I click render again, and you will see that it's gonna start there in the middle and not from the side or from the corners. And also with the right click, you can define and lock a bucket starting point. You can see that. Lock bucket starting point. Well, these are a little bit secondary from the rest. And then you can decide if you want to use progressive or bucket. It's your choice. So let's stick with progressive. Those are just two different ways to render, but they are gonna do the same. They're gonna process the image and try to increase the quality and reduce the noise. Okay, and finally you have this to save your render. So if when you're finished, you can click here and you can go into the folder where you are saving the renderings. Okay, and you can save in different formats. So you can save, for example, in PNG, and that's gonna also contain the alpha channel, which is the channel for the transparency, and in this case the background you can see is transparent. Or you can save JPEG, and in this case you can see that the background is not transparent, but it's showing the VRAY sky. And you just give a name to your render. In this case I call this render 2 and say save. Well, of course now it's gonna replace this one here because I already saved it. Now if you click and hold with the left mouse, you can see that the default option is to save the current channel. The current channel is what you see here, and you can change the channel from here. So if I switch, for example, to alpha channel and click save again, this is gonna only save the alpha. So let's save this as a JPEG and call this render 2 alpha and save it. Okay, and let's switch back to the RGB color and save it again. And let's switch from PNG to JPEG. You can see that I've saved the alpha, and this is the standard RGB color. So you can choose which channels you can save as a render. And we will talk about channels later because those are really important for the post-production. But in this case, just remember that you can save your image from here, and you can also save all the channel in separate files or save all the image channels to a single file. And for example, to use like in Photoshop or something like that, some graphic design software. So RGB colors are basically the reds, the greens, and the blues inside your render, and the alpha channel is the fourth channel for transparency. White means not transparent, black means total transparency, and the grays are like a middle way between the two. So you can always check the different RGB channels and the alpha channel from here, from the VRAY frame buffer. And this concludes the part about the render options. But you also have some additional tools here in the new VRAY, and one of the best tools that has appeared in the latest version is the VRAY Vision. Now VRAY Vision can be called like another way to render, and this is gonna create an interactive vision of your project. So it's gonna be an interactive render. There you go. And so I can move around here, and I can also navigate, for example, inside the scene here. So it's kind of playing video games when you move around. You can use the movement that you usually use in SketchUp. So you can scroll the wheel to make the zoom, and also right click to zoom, and left click to orbit, and shift and left click to change the position of the sun. You can see this is all interactive, and I'm not re-rendering this like in the actual interactive rendering, like this one here. So this is a step beyond the interactive rendering, because we don't need to re-render over and over. We just need to render one time. The shadows, the lights, the objects are baked into the model so that we can move around without actually re-rendering all over again, like the interactive. So it's more like a real-time render than an interactive render. So it's a higher level of interactivity. So you can explore this just like a video game level. You can get inside and move around here with the pan. There you go. So this is, I can check the interiors. Well, we're gonna talk a little bit better about this viewer or this tool called VRAY Vision in the following video. But this is just to show you that we have an additional option to render out our scene here in VRAY for SketchUp. So you can also hold the shift and the right button of the mouse if you want to change the exposure. So left mouse, you change the sun position, and the right, it's gonna change the intensity of the light or the exposure. And then you can see here that we have a lot of tools that we are gonna check in the following videos. So we have these, well, basically 3 main options, and then we have also secondary tools, but the 3 main option is to have static render. So it's gonna be something that you're gonna launch and you have to wait to finish, and that's it. It's not gonna move, it's not gonna do anything. You have the interactive, that is, it will let you visualize any change not in real time, but interactively. So it's gonna re-render each time it's gonna detect a change in your scene or in the light or wherever. And then you have this real time, which is gonna kind of bake the light into the scene, and it's gonna show you the model, and it's gonna let you explore it and move around without rendering. And you have also some logic which is similar to the first-person shooters or video games, or like Unreal Engine or Unity, and you have the FPS right here, which are the frame per second. That's the speed which is gonna render your scene, and also the frames, because we are running right now at 30 frames per second. This means that it's doing 30 renderings each second. So we're gonna continue in the following video. This will be all for this. So thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.